Panorama is the fourth studio album from Michigan emo post-hardcore band La Dispute, fronted by Jordan Dreyer. This guy, Jordan Dreyer, the frontman, is incredibly captivating in my opinion. His lyrics are very honest and just piercing. I would highly recommend going through some of their back catalogue, particularly the first two albums. When I first listened to La Dispute, I found them a bit yelpy, a bit whiny. It kind of just like threw me off a little bit because I don't think I was too accustomed to sort of this sound as much as I am now, I guess, because I've gotten into bands like, you know, Touche Amore, fucking Title Fight, fucking Gospel, Glassjaw. Just post-hardcore emo stuff in general has kind of warmed up to me over time, I suppose, so I don't really find it too much of a distraction now coming back to their music. But yeah, Wildlife, this album is actually really unique. It's basically a series of real-life, like, news stories and events that actually happened, just kind of told through the lens of Jordan Dreyer, just outlining a lot of very melancholic and bleak things, and sort of portraying it in a very fast-paced, dense, wordy, and fierce emo context. This new album, though, Panorama, is not much like that in its presentation. It's actually quite different. It doesn't really have that same sort of, like, each song is its own story kind of format. Instead, this whole album is basically one panoramic view of just grief as a whole, I think. Coping with the loss of a loved one or helping your loved ones through similar things, and I think the stage is set pretty well, I suppose, with the opening track, Fulton Street 1. I think Jordan Dreyer's just really unapologetic delivery is what kind of hits at home for the most part, but this song, Fulton Street 1, I don't really enjoy it as much as I feel like I should do, and I think it's mostly because of the instrumental. The music on Panorama is a lot more sluggish, subtle, despondent than it was on previous La Dispute albums. It's glossier too and kind of has a little bit of a post-rock tinge. Like, this track actually especially does, and I found the song a little bit predictable in the way it would, like, move, like, structure-wise. I think the pace of the song is just a little bit, yeah, just kind of sluggish, I suppose, because I can kind of just map out the song, or I could map out the song. When I first heard the track, I could kind of just tell where it was going a little bit. And it kind of just does the same build twice, and the mixing's a little bit weird too. Like, his vocals are kind of quiet, and I think all of those things kind of distracted from the raw power of what he was saying, to the point where it failed to really move me as much as I feel like it could have done, because the second track right after this, Fulton Street 2, is much more blunter in its presentation. And this track is a really appropriate lyrical aftermath to Fulton Street 1, where he's sort of just making a statement and goal on this track to be that person. Like, he wants to be everything that these people need. He wants to carry them through this pain. And his delivery is, again, so emotionally potent and piercing, but now it's just backed up with an instrumental that I think just feels more just kind of impactful as well, just more appropriate to go alongside his voice, allowing him to just kind of focus on what he's saying. And I think Rhodonite and Grief does this quite well too. This instrumental is a bit more passive, and this song is specifically talking about helping someone else through grief. And I think the fact that the instrumental just isn't as flashy on this track makes total sense, because it means you can't really turn away from what's being said. But yeah, I do think you kind of just have to be engaged with the vocals and the lyrics to really enjoy La Dispute, because that's really what's carrying, like, a lot of it. And, you know, instrumentally, I think their songs are enjoyable as well, but yeah, like, the lyrics is, like, the focal point of their music. On this album, these lyrics are very poetic and very melancholic, which I wouldn't really mind if it covered enough ground to sort of justify the really huge abundance of, like, you know, poetic spoken word pieces on this album. There are so many of those. But often I find these songs just kind of seem to sort of recycle the same general vague sort of broad themes of just grief and loss, like on Anxiety Panorama, or View from the Bedroom Window, or You Ascendant, which to me just kind of seems to restate the point of Fulton Street 2. Like, outside of a few lines just directly referencing just, like, where he wants to be when he dies and how he wants to be at peace when he dies, it seems to me like this song and Fulton Street 2 kind of serve the same purpose, I think. Just generally talking about how he desperately wants to be there for those who have died now that he's seen all of this loss happen around him. The song that personally hit me the most, though, was probably Footsteps at the Pond. This track sort of explains how grief can crumble what seemed like a very perfect an ideal relationship, and how like, now that there's been like a huge loss and they're both having to cope with it together, this song just kind of depicts that relationship just sort of falling apart, and there's a lot of just kind of fear and resentment happening in these lyrics, and how those lines about how, like, I guess you wanted me to just bleed out loud. And I take that as him kind of recognizing that this person would have benefited from him just kind of being there to mourn with them, but he's kind of failed to be that person, so as a result the relationship is just kind of falling apart. And then you have There You Are, Hiding Place right after, which, by the way, the transition from Footsteps to There You Are is amazing. Like, when There You Are hits, it's like that huge, like, emotional outburst has just been, like, lifted, and it's just like this really nice comforting sense of just warmth, which I think is just so appropriate at this point in the album. And that part in There You Are where he's just saying how like when he was scared during the summer, when he was afraid, he just stared into nothing. I actually find that part specifically to be the most moving on the whole album, because it's just showing that like he's not even able to react, like he's just staring into nothing, and everything is just sort of in that moment kind of like hitting him at once to the point where he's just completely frozen. In Northern Michigan is what I find a little bit confusing, because the song just feels generally a bit aimless. It's mostly dominated by kind of awkward spoken word, and the instrumental is really subtle. There's sort of this lingering, just kind of like drony guitar happening in the background, which just kind of sounds like the anger inside him just like waiting to strike or something. Because the music is nowhere near as raw now, I think these ideas don't really hit as effectively or as like bluntly as they could, or as they have done on previous La Dispute albums. Ultimately, I don't really see myself returning to this album much, but I will say it does feel like just someone getting so much shit off of their chest. Just like, it's such a cathartic album like that. Like, it's clear when you're hearing these performances and you're hearing the way these songs are written that these are just so, there's just so many like thoughts like this just kind of bottling up in Jordan's head, and he's just sort of exerting all of it on this album. I do understand that this album must be just like such a huge relief for the band, you know, to make this. They've also made like a video game that you can play while you hear these songs called Pilgrimage, which I actually did that. I actually played that game, and it's basically you just kind of wandering through various like broken landscapes while the songs just kind of play and the lyrics just kind of appear in the sky and shit. And the cover of this thing looks like the sequel to Journey or something. It looks like a fucking Future Bass album, which I think is an interesting visual aesthetic for an album like this, but you know, fair enough. Ultimately though, I'm gonna go 6 out of 10. I thought it was okay. I don't think it's bad. I think it's a quality record, but for my personal enjoyment, I think just the kind of like repetitive lyrical themes and just kind of despondent spoken word passages and just the kind of glossy production stopped it from being something that really can reach much higher than a 6 out of 10 for me personally. But I do definitely respect this album a lot, and I would recommend trying it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Panorama by La Dispute. Thank you for watching my review. I'll see you on the next one. Bye!